So many of you know Millie. Millie was ordained by the UU congregation about a year ago as a minister, and she's well known amongst us as being someone very active in social justice, labor rights, and many other aspects of social justice. Until recently, until COVID hit, she was serving the UU congregation in Lake County, I think it was. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Millie and take it from there, Millie.
Right. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it. First of all, let me start with a few caveats. Just to let you know, I have yet to develop the ability to screen share smoothly on Zoom, so you'll need to bear with me as I attempt to do that adequately. And secondly, I had hoped to find a short video on the topic of ecohumanism around which to frame this presentation, but I didn't find one that was short. And lastly, I'm not an academic expert on the topic. The views expressed here are my own as a humanist and supported by the words of others with similar views that I researched for this presentation. So I'm going to do a screen share right now. Bear with me. I hope you can see that. Okay, so the outline of my presentation is going to be first to address that ecohumanism is a means to address the debate between anthropocentrism and biocentrism, and I'll define those later, without abandoning the basic values of humanism. Secondly, are humanist views already ecologically sound, or do we need a new form called ecohumanism to achieve this? Third, there are different points of view within ecohumanism, but there are some consistent points of agreement, and I'll give some examples of ecohumanist views, and then I will give a brief conclusion. That's the outline. So I'm going to turn this off for right now. Right. To start, why is addressing ecohumanism important? Simply because humanism, as both a philosophy and a practice, is often attacked for being anthropocentric, that is, focused on human needs, as opposed to biocentric, which is focused on the needs of all life forms, even if such needs do not benefit humanity. So I'm going to share some definitions of that, if you'll just hold on here. So anthropocentrism is a focus primarily or exclusively on the positive value of humans. And it's usually interpreted to mean at the expense of other life forms. And biocentrism is a focus on the positive value of all forms of life, which is usually interpreted as meaning that human needs are no more important than the needs of other life forms. So after all, the purpose of humanism is to support humans. That is, it's focused on human needs. And so in that sense, it is anthropocentric. Our survival as a species and our ability to thrive is the goal of humanism, and without the need of supernatural forces to intervene. Because humanists reject the need for supernatural forces, humanism is in fact more grounded in the natural world than philosophies that see outside intervention as necessary to our well-being. But that's another topic someone else could take up a different time. So, as I said before, humanism is anthropocentric in the sense that it places the survival and thriving of humans as its central goal. Ecohumanism, however, argues that this goal does not have to be inconsistent with the environmental ethic of respect for other life and the interdependence of all life forms. Like all species, humans have evolved certain abilities and skills, and the ability to debate these matters is one of our most prominent. We could argue that the skills and abilities of other forms of life are of equal value to our own. We could, and I think should, agree that we are dependent on the skills and abilities of other life forms. But it would be very hard to claim that the skills and abilities of other species have an equal impact on the environment that sustains us all. Only humans at this point have developed the degree of language, technology, and political organization that allows conscious decisions that affect the ability of the environment to sustain us and other species. Humans do not currently have the ability to destroy the Earth as a whole, but we do have the ability to alter the environment, which is obvious in the present moment, in ways harmful to ourselves and to other species. This human power justifies a degree of anthropocentric exceptionalism, but it also demands the responsibility to exercise power in a way that doesn't undermine our ultimate humanist goals. If we use this power to decrease the ability of the environment to sustain us and the species we share it with, and we have, how does that promote the goals of humanism? It simply does not. A genuine humanism must be environmentally responsible and ethical. And that is where ecohumanism comes in. However, if humanism innately favors protecting sustainability, why would we need ecohumanism? I think a useful analogy might be the debate in UU today about adding an 8th principle, spelling out the need to be anti-racist. I happen to be neutral on this question. On one hand, UU may be so immersed in a racist worldview that it needs explicit language to remind us to act justly. On the other hand, principles, by definition, must be universally applicable. Rejecting any diminishment of human value, including by race, is inherent within our 7 principles. If we actually followed them consistently, we would need no statement telling us how to follow them. Similarly, humanists may need to be reminded to be environmentally responsible, even though our principles logically demand us to be so anyway. The problem then is hypocrisy, or the lack of an adequate vision, not the principles or wordsmithing. However, that's my take on the term ecohumanism. Those who advocate and write about it may have similar views, but many go further, seeing ecohumanism as distinct from humanism generally, as a medium ground between anthropocentrism and biocentrism. And in a minute, I'm going to share a few slides that contain quotations from ecohumanist writers that show this range of views. Some of the common features of these writers are: humans are capable of living in harmony with our environment. Technology is morally positive if used effectively for positive goals. And that current economic and political relationships are the underlying cause and the main obstacle toward achieving an ecologically responsible way of living, and thus must be transformed. I would add that while contemporary mainstream humanism supports the first 2 of these features, it has yet to adopt the third, choosing instead to remain within the worldview of liberalism, which accepts, albeit with some modifications, the current political and economic structures. Thus, ecohumanism is, in practice, a distinct variant of humanism. So at this point, I'm going to share some slides of various people who have written on this topic, just to show some examples of some of the points of view that have been raised. These are very summary quotes. Let me share again. Okay, this is from a professor named David Choderkoff. This is from a paper. If I can move this so I can see it better. So I'll just read these quickly. It's probably easier to do. I'm sorry, I advanced too far. My mistake. Okay. As a species, we have the ability to affect other species, ecosystems, and in fact the biosphere itself in a profound fashion, which finds no parallel in any other species. The ends that we seek, societies moving toward ever greater complexity, diversity, and freedom, organized non-hierarchically and mutualistic in their orientation, creating unity through diversity, both homeostatic and spontaneous, and self-conscious about their role in relation to first nature, can only be brought about by social movements that reflect and embody those same principles. And by the way, by first nature, he was referring to our biological nature as opposed to what we have added on as we've, constructed society. So here's a quote somewhat different from an author named Roy Scranton, who I don't know anything about. But you cannot argue that humans are morally equivalent to spotted owls, whales, or sequoias, while also arguing at the same time that humans have a moral obligation to modify their behaviors towards spotted owls, whales, or sequoias. On the other hand, taking a strong anthropocentric stand toward the non-human world offers at best a stewardship of utilitarian calculation, still prone to the same short-sighted arrogance, which put us on the trajectory of self-destruction we find ourselves on today. If we believe in the value of human life, human reason, human diversity, and human creativity, then our obligation is clear. We must find a way to ground humanistic values in reverence toward and submission to that unknowable totality, which, lacking a better term, we call nature. This is from Richard Hobbs, who is the chair of Human Agenda, which is an organization based in San Jose. Without a commitment to keep our natural resources healthy and whole, we have a horribly dim future as a species. This is the difference between ecohumanism, which seeks to optimize the use of resources and focus on what activities make us great as human beings, and capitalism, which seeks to maximize commodity production and the use of resources and focus on the wealth and consumption of the few while impoverishing our planet. The concept of humanism alone as a self-standing term is incomplete. Only when we take into account our relationship to the planet and to the entire universe do we have a full next system. Humanism as an existing philosophy also carries its loaded connotations that do not incorporate the breadth of an eco-humanist vision built upon the complete set of needs for a healthy planet and healthy. And lastly is some quotes from an author, Janet Beale. She was reviewing another book. This is actually from her review of another person. The ecological crisis ostensibly presents us with an impossible choice. The driving force behind the crisis is industrial capitalism. The alternative is the neo-romantic rejection of industrial civilization in favor of wilderness. The first choice, the expanding capitalist order, has proved itself to be unsustainable. It is the very path leading to the ecological crisis. But the alternative, the fetishization of wilderness, is untenable as well, since pursuing it would require a massive reduction in human population, so neo-Malthusianism, the subordination of human aims to perceived natural ones, and a regression to a low-tech hunter-gatherer existence. The choice between these two paths represents a false dilemma. There is a third way, ecological humanism, an affirmation that human beings are capable of transforming their societies so as to embrace the flourishing of both humanity and nature. Sources for those quotes in case you're interested. You go forward one. Okay, this Janet Beale was from the review of a book called Pioneers of Ecological Humanism. Quotes from Daniel Chodorkoff were from a published draft of a paper. I don't know if he ever published the completed version. They're from Richard Hobbs, is from the Human Agenda website. It's kind of a manifesto called Clear the Decks for Ecohumanism. And the quotes from Roy Scranton are from a blog entry on the Society of U.S. Intellectual History. So you're welcome. I can, if you want me to send you these links, I could do so. Just contact me offline. Okay. So ecohumanism is distinct from contemporary humanism, and this is my conclusion, in that it goes beyond a liberal framework to recognize that a fundamental political and economic transformation is necessary both to protect and to achieve the goal of human thriving. So I'm going to stop screen share. So, am I an eco-humanist? I'd say yes, since we cannot move forward to a sustainable, responsible, and spiritually connected life in which all humans can flourish and other species survive and thrive too, if we do not get rid of the main reason why we are not there yet. As a lifelong socialist, ecohumanism provides for me the missing link between humanism, which don't went far enough, and socialist philosophies. So that's the end of the presentation, and I thank you for listening, and I will turn it back over to Jim to facilitate our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Millie. So if you have questions or comments, if you know how to raise your hand electronically, we can do it that way. And if you don't know how to do that, then you can write something in the chat and we can do it that way. Deborah has her hand up, so if you want to unmute yourself, Deborah.
Okay. I don't know, I suppose I can argue with practically everything, but I always found humanism to be extremely compatible in its viewpoints, particularly the respect for science and reason, to be completely compatible with ecosystems and the life support systems on the planet. One of the things that I did note when I had to make myself up a little 40-second credo for humanism, I did have to inject one little phrase, the health of the planet, which is our home, to sort of encompass that notion. But I find it really is there anyway. I don't see any dichotomy. When we respect science and reason, we respect nature, or at least I do.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment, question?
I would be happy to say that I agree with you, Deborah, that it is inherent in our principles, but as I said in the presentation, the practice of humanism by people as humanists isn't always consistent with that, and I think that is where the critique has come from for those that do respect science. Of course, those who do not respect science may have other critiques of humanism.
I mean, it does sound like an anthropocentric sort of a philosophy just because it has human right there, in its name. And it's also true, I think, that sometimes people don't always know the intricacies of how to do the best job they can of respecting nature, or perhaps they're simply preventive. I mean, driving electric cars is not something everybody can do, for example. And I don't know, the other major thing is buying less stuff. Of course, a lot of people are so poor now that's, they're just doing that as part and parcel of the current difficulty with COVID and not having jobs and whatnot. So, although I have understood that, unfortunately, COVID has allowed a lot of what I'm looking for, to ignore environmental consequences. One thing I keep thinking about is every time they show pictures of all these vaccine vials and everything, I'm thinking, oh my God, those are single-use plastic thingies that are going to end up in the landfill. And there's going to be hundreds of millions of them. But I mean, you got to do what you got to do, but it seems like we could, as a society, come up with better ways of dealing with things than single-use crap. So anyway.
Okay, Dolores and or David.
Yeah, yeah, I just want to thank Millie so much for presenting this program, because I've always thought, I mean, I consider myself a humanist, but it's that in the language, in the description, it doesn't include, for me, enough language relative to other creatures on Earth. And I don't have it in front of me right now what the manifesto is, but I still think a lot could be done to increase humanists' awareness and get them moving, acting more. That's right. All of us can't afford electric cars and things like. We can do a lot of other things. We can, even appreciate nature a little bit more, and just make it more inclusive into the humanist ideal. And in its language, I think the humanist language, its manifesto or description should include more references to other creatures on Earth and the Earth itself. So I just really appreciate this, Millie. I don't know what can be done, but I think a lot of little things can be done by people to become more active in the environmental movement. So I just want to make, and Dave wants to say something.
All right, David.
Yeah, just maybe a minor point about the preservation of the natural world, but pursue the canary in the coal mine analogy a little bit. Responses in the non-human living world have often been early warnings of the damage that human beings are doing. I think science is now, hard science is beginning to sort of catch up and pay attention to this. But, I think of Henry David Thoreau's notations about, when certain plants came into bloom. And this has been useful for, from the early 19th century to see how the, earlier blooming of things
And the birds.
is an end, and the arrival of birds.
Birds are dying off in massive numbers
early,
now.
Indications. So I think the health of the animal world, preserving that goes a long way to preserving our own in the long run. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I would just comment the last manifesto was 2005, I believe, and it does have a paragraph in there about sustainability of nature. And I would imagine that if another manifesto is written, since we're on the third one, I'd have a fourth, that it probably would have a bit more emphasis on this fact, because, 2005, we were definitely concerned about the environment, but it's become much more acute, I think, since then. Millie, did you have a?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that, because one of the things I really appreciate about the eco-humanist writers that I researched, and I didn't find any who would disagree with this particular point, was that they really looked at the political and economic structures that prevent us from becoming environmentally conscious. And rather than blaming the average individual who lives, perhaps in all cases involuntarily, whether they like it or not, within that system. And the third manifesto doesn't really deal with that. And the first manifesto actually did. So I think in some ways we've lost some of the economic and political consciousness within humanism that it once had, even though we have gained a degree of environmental consciousness. But without combining those two, I don't think we can easily move forward. Just my own opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the first manifesto, I can't remember the exact words. It didn't use the word socialism, but I mean, this was 1933, and the the economic depression and all that was very much a thing to deal with. And they did use language which could easily be interpreted as socialism.
Certainly
I
a critique of the existing system anyway, regardless of what you replace it with.
Yeah. I think the third one, it has something about how we should share the resources of nature or whatever equally, but it doesn't have the same. I think it allows one to envision a non-socialist solution to the problem of nature and the environment. I think you're right. There was a change from that period of time.
Anne has her hand up.
So,
Anne.
Go ahead.
me. So, Millie, what steps do you see Bay Area residents as taking relative to the economic and the political structures that are preventing eco-humanism, preventing our dedication to the planet? What specific steps?
It's a good question. I think one of the specific steps, there's a couple I see, but I think one of them is becoming more politically independent. I think that because we live in a two-party system, and which, you know, one party is viewed as somewhat better than the other, but neither party actually calls for the type of, you know, drastic measures that need to be taken, that we need to be able to act without subordinating ourselves to those two parties. So that would be one thing that I strongly feel is that we need this degree of political independence and willing to organize without the approval of, in our case, the Democratic Party. So I think that's an important factor, and possibly organizing a truly broad third party, which, you know, I'm not sure it's so there's various proposals for that and various existing small actions, but I think we could move further on that. The majority of young people, for example, say they want that when polled. So I think that that's an area. And I think also just engaging in the environmental movement, you know, and particularly those parts of the environmental movement that are willing to, you know, do direct action and think, you know, defending the pipeline for activists, for example, that sort of activity. I think it's important to actually disrupt the system that allows the environmental destruction and to defend those people who are doing so. So I'm very supportive of peaceful, you know, direct action. So those would be a couple of things that come to mind first. I'm sure there's many more if I thought it through more, but thank you for the question.
Millie, can I go on that again? So the Green Party is a local party that is, no, that would, I think, respond to what you're talking about. Do you see that as, you know, as a good move for many of us at this time, joining, you know, becoming a Green Party member?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the Green Party is a good thing, and I think that it would be part of a broader solution to this problem. I don't think that the Green Party, in my personal experience in working with people in the Green Party, has enough of a focus on economic justice issues. Just so I think there kind of needs to be a broader movement that would contain the Green Party, but would not be limited to it. So that's kind of more my take on it. I'm not against the Green Party, but I'm not, you know, I'm not a member of it or at this point. I voted for their candidates on occasion, but I'm not a member.
Okay, Betsy, did you have a question? No, someone told me you did. Okay, Judith has a question.
Thank you. I'm an artist, and I was selling lots of paintings to galleries and corporate places through an agent, and it's driven me crazy because the only way I could make a living was to take the money of people that I don't agree with. So I've been doing these. This is the beginning of a hat. I crochet and weave and teach how to make things out of old clothes and plastic bags. And I'm in Oakland, and I've got a couple places, the Ecology Center, was going gung-ho on all these classes, and then the pandemic happened, but now I'm starting to be able to do these things online. But what happened with me was that I wanted to be out on the streets marching and doing all these things, but I can't now. And then what's the small step? Because to accomplish anything large is completely out of my ability and my connections to do it. So I've gotten a lot of satisfaction of doing these small things, of being able to recycle. And also people bring me bags of old clothes. I tear things apart. I save the seams. I just made a 5-foot weaving out of the seams of the clothes that I tear apart to make things like these hats, which are quite nice. But then selling them, the amount of time it takes me, I have to charge so much money that I'm again in that level where it's not accessible to people who are like me. I can't afford my own stuff, So, and how far do we go in stepping back from the industrial capitalism? Like if everybody did what I did and recycled stuff and didn't buy anything new, then what fills in the gaps of that?
Mind if I answer? Yeah, well, I think that although I appreciate what you're doing and I respect it, and I'm in no way against it, so don't get me wrong. But I do think that that's part of the problem, that we're caught in a system. We're all caught in it. And whether we work for a corporation to get paid for it or we buy its products, if we, under COVID, most of us have had to order things online. We're supporting Amazon by doing that, etc. If we, there's a whole range of things we do that are not constructive. But I would argue that we have little choice. Like you were really defining that very well, that you don't find yourself having choices in this matter because you do live within this particular system. So that's why my overall critique of the system itself is stronger than my critique of individual practices within it. And I respect all those people who are trying to make a difference through individual practices and through small businesses, even corporate practices, if they're making an honest effort. I appreciate that. But I don't think in the long run it's going to solve the ultimate problem of being able to move forward. It does buy us time. Anything we do that lessens pollution or lessens, climate change, buys us a few more minutes of time. But I don't think it will deal with the final reckoning we're going to have to deal with if we don't make some fundamental changes. Now, making fundamental change obviously isn't easy, and we would have done it by now if it was easy, in my opinion. So I'm not necessarily optimistic about the ability to change the system, in the way it needs to be changed, in my opinion. But I'm even less optimistic about what will happen if we don't. So I think, supporting as you can, organizations that are dealing with these issues is probably the best step that we can take as individuals at this point, in my opinion. So hope that's.
Rusha?
Russia, unmute yourself.
Hi. Thanks so much for this presentation. It was really interesting. And I just wanted to ask a kind of a clarifying question about I'm not familiar enough with humanism to know, is part of the distinction that the eco-humanists are making about where intrinsic value lies? So placing intrinsic value not just on general all life forms, but putting us in a context of an ecological world that has intrinsic value, and we're a part of it, then takes the focus a little bit less off of the functionality of having a good environment in order to live a better human existence. And if so, maybe that is what needs to guide the conversation about the global conversation about the economy, because I think the economy is often driven by whatever's going to serve the dollar. And if eco-humanism can kind of prevail upon the human population of the world to say we are actually part of something that has its own value outside of economy and human existence, maybe that helps our decision making.
Yeah, I think that the capitalism, with all of its externalities, is distinctly inimical to consideration of nature, and the other thing is it's very focused on bottom line, this quarter, next quarter, no long-term view whatsoever. And it's so entrenched. I mean, and socialism has this pejorative attribute now with large swaths of the population, and very few people are willing to give up any creature comfort to deal with the environment. So it's a hard push, I mean, to get it dealt with politically, or even individually. It's still a big political football whether climate change exists. People are still debating it, or whether we cause it. I think most people are saying, yeah, it's there, but whether we're seen as causing it is still highly debated, which is bizarre and absurd. But sometimes I lose faith in not so much humanity, but capitalists for sure.
Could I respond to the previous question? Is that okay? Yeah, I think you're right that the eco-humanists are trying to find a kind of a medium ground between a strictly anthropocentric point of view and a strictly biocentric point of view. Like the function of humanism, in a sense, is to promote human survival and human thriving, and the eco-humanists are not apologetic about that. But they see the need, and I think it was most particularly revealed in the Roy Scranton's quote, about having a kind of a reverence for and a humility in the presence of nature and the presence of the natural world that counterbalances a sort of an arrogant and egotistical approach to the world. So I think, yes, in my opinion, I would agree with Deborah earlier that that's kind of innate for me within humanist values, but it's not obvious. And I think that there is a need to make that point more clearly, and I think that's where the eco-humanists in particular are going. And I also think that some of the practicing humanists, and again, this is not a critique of humanism as a philosophy, but as a practice, is that it is within primarily, at least in this country, within a very limited liberal framework. And the kind of advocacy that humanists do politically is around, say, the separation of church and state, for example, which is an important issue and needs to be dealt with, but it's not a human survival issue in the immediate sense, in my opinion. So that's, I think, part of eco-humanism is to point out that we need radical change in order to achieve the humanist vision. And as Deborah said, it's damned hard, and there's no guarantee we'll be able to do it. And I'm not terribly optimistic about our ability to do it, to be honest. I agree with Deborah on that. However, there was the old, socialist line about, the alternative is barbarism, and if not extinction. So, and, I think that the word socialism, I mean, you can quibble about language on this level, but the concept of getting rid of capitalism is, I don't care what one calls the ultimate result. But I think that when we live in a society that makes all decisions based upon making a few individuals wealthy, that is not environmentally sound. It's not sound for any other social justice nature. It uses racism to keep itself afloat. And sexism to keep itself afloat. All those things are, if not caused by it, at least major tools in keeping itself in power. So we have to be addressing social justice on all kinds of fronts, and the environment being only one of them. but the environment is also ultimately the one that's going to, kill us all, if not, nuclear war, which is, militarism, either militarism or the climate change is going to destroy us all if we don't do something about it relatively soon. So.
Okay, is that you, Bob, on the phone?
Yes, yes, it is. I just wanted to put in a little I guess a plug for Jared Diamond's work. He worked with the World Wildlife Fund, I believe it was, in establishing ecological sustainability standards for resource extraction industries. And one of the things that he points out in his book, the book that he's written a number of books, but the one that I'm referencing is called Collapse. And one of the things that he points out is that corporations and capitalists would be more economically or more ecologically minded, more ecologically responsible if the rest of society held their feet to the fire and did not allow them to get away with the ecological destruction. And he has some interesting examples of businesses that have been able to maintain sustainable resource extraction with minimal ecological, I keep mistaking those words, ecological impact in a way that is also profitable for the companies themselves, for the organizations themselves. So it is possible for capitalism to be made more responsible. The problem is for me, the problem is pure capitalism. Under pure capitalism, then greed, hate, and delusion is primary, and everything else is thrown under the bus. But Diamond is a big he's a big advocate for popular and populist movements to promote ecological sustainability.
A question, can I ask? So what about what's happening in California with Newsom giving a lot of oil contracts for fracking? And I wonder if Bob knows anything about that, or, I mean, is that what Bob is saying, something that is technologically safer than just, killing the earth, taking the lifeblood out of it? Or, because that's a local issue. I mean, I think we could, if I knew more about, there's so many things happening, it's hard to really, for me to get good information. Maybe Bob has some, Bob, is he still there? I don't know, Millie, somebody?
Well, I don't know what I'm not a big fan of fracking. It's not an ecologically sound extraction method, and it causes a lot of damage and poisoning of the environment with especially pumping what is it, antifreeze, putting antifreeze into the groundwater. It's not a very smart thing to do. But the kind of resource extraction that I was talking about was not as horrific as that. One of the industry that he sees as one of the biggest problems is hard metal mining, because the profit margins are so thin that companies are sort of encouraged to have shoddy practices and leave toxic waste lying around to leach into the environment. And it's not just poisoning the environment for other animals. It also especially poisons the environment for human beings downstream.
Yeah, I'd like to respond a little bit to that. Bob, I do agree that it's important to put pressure on corporations to do the right thing. Like, to the extent that they do, that's a good thing, and we need to promote it, particularly in the current moment. obviously radical social change takes time, and that's something we can do in the present moment. So I would agree that it's important to do that. I also think that it's important to pressure the government to restore environmental regulation, particularly during the Trump administration. We've lost a lot of our environmental regulation, and we've lost leadership in the agencies that enforce it. So I'm hoping that we can pressure the Biden administration to make sure that there are good people running those agencies and that those laws are brought back. So that's another thing we can do in the present moment, is to push for better regulation and for, better corporate practices. I don't think that will solve the problem ultimately in the long run, but that's a difference of opinion I may have with people who think capitalism can be reformed. I don't think it can be, but I would love to be proven wrong. And I think that in the short run, that is something we can do that would be beneficial.
Okay, so I guess for me, when I look around the world, if we believe, I understand the problems of capitalism, the necessity of profit and expansion of markets and that sort of thing, but I do believe that can be contained to some degree. It's not enough. I agree with that. We need to do a lot more than that. But then I look at other, socialist countries, and what's a socialist country? There's always a big definitional problem there. But let's look at China. Okay, it's communist, but it also has a socialist economy, or did. But it basically started incorporating a lot of capitalist aspects to it, as I understand it. And why did it do that? It did that because its population insisted that they wanted a better life. They wanted to consume more. And so that even a socialist government is subject to those pressures, I think. And China is a polluting country. So I'm not sure that simply jumping to a socialist model will in and of itself solve the problem. So basically, you do have to have the regulations for whatever economy you have, whoever's in charge. And one might say that certainly a democratic government is more subject to that kind of change than one that is totalitarian.
I'd like to add something to that, Jim, that, I'm a very democratic socialist. I'm totally opposed to authoritarian and totalitarian states. And I think part of the reason why the countries you're referring to, became those, and there's various reasons why they did, but that was not beneficial to the populations of those countries. But I would like to add that we have, capitalism has done one good thing. It has developed our resources to the point that we actually could feed the world. It would take $30 billion, I read somewhere, to actually end starvation in the world right now and sustain it for a good, basic level of nutrition for a fairly long time. We actually have the resources to feed the world and to maintain a modest standard of living for everyone. And people who don't have that modest standard of living have every reason to want to have it. And I think the Chinese population was particularly impoverished. And to have a basic lifestyle that is not even at is at the level of probably the poorest in our society is not an unreasonable demand. And again, I don't think we should ever criticize people for wanting a decent standard of living. Where I think the criticism should lie is the fact that a tiny handful of people control more than half of the world's resources and don't share it, or share it in very limited ways. And people think there is not enough to go around. But imagine what could be released if the holdings of those people were distributed, in a more equal way. We could sustain a modest standard of living for everyone, in my opinion. And that would be a good thing.
Okay, Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, it always comes back to what is that basic standard of living, right? I mean, what the 1% of the wealthy consider the standard of living has gotten so skewed by generational wealth, compared to what somebody in an emerging country might feel. And the other one that we never look at is that every time you get into a re-election, even the socialists are always basing their economies on growth, not on sustainability. So, no one ever gets back to the fact that we need to come up with an economic plan that doesn't rely on population growth, that doesn't rely on, and nobody ever talks about zero population, net zero population again. It's like a taboo subject. So I really think, sustainability kind of goes counter with all these growth initiatives, like always saying the GDP is going to grow.
Yeah, I think the growth model, and particularly the lack of anything like an economic model to deal with population shrinkage. There's actually a fair amount of work now being done on economic sustainability, but we need population shrinkage, which is really a small matter. It's just more, fewer births than deaths in any given year, and the population goes down. But when we see that happening,
Japan's already facing it.
Yeah, I mean, they get all upset. They say, have more babies, we've got to have growth, we've got to consume, because we have this model of growth. And that is absolutely unsustainable. We can't keep growing. The earth is finite. And one of the things that I like to stress when we're talking about the environment, particularly with trash, is there is no away on earth. When you pollute, that pollution doesn't go away unless you clean it up. Some stuff biodegrades in the environment naturally, but as you pointed out, mining and stuff like that, that stuff's forever unless you clean it up. So we have to stop thinking about the earth as this infinite place where more and more people can live in a better standard of living. The fact of the matter is, we are coming very close, or perhaps have already surpassed, the ability of the arable land on earth to feed the earth's population. Arable land is being constantly degraded. It's being constantly paved over. And climate change is, of course, affecting it by creating desertification. So it may be true that a certain amount of money might feed the world, but can the earth produce that much food? Probably if everybody went vegetarian, we might last a little longer, but even still, if the population keeps growing, we need some serious economic models for population shrinkage. And there's only one book that I know of written on that. It's a hefty economics text that cost $1,000 or was 1,000 pages or something, I forget, but I was gonna buy it, but it was way too expensive and I'm not an economist. And it came out of, interestingly, Japan, which has been overpopulated for centuries. So I think that's the problem, is we have no good picture, no models for how this is going to work to shrink populations while everybody is still, living okay, not dying of starvation or something.
Unfortunately, most people who advocated population control in the, say, the 1970s, when it was a very popular topic, you mentioned it became a taboo topic because a lot of those people were extremely racist and xenophobic, and they were sort of deep ecologists who actually wanted to see the human race decline as a entity, that felt that would be a good thing, and they didn't care how that happened. And of course, there are authoritarian regimes that have attempted to control population, China being one of those, that use coercive means to do so. So those things clearly aren't popular, and then they shouldn't be popular, in my opinion. I think that coercive population control is not just for a wide range of reasons. One of the ways, however, to control population that is not coercive and that has been actually quite effective is educating women.
Exactly.
Yeah, just education and making birth control available to those that are educated and want to use it.
Yeah, and by promoting the access to reproductive rights and promoting women's education, I think that is something that can be done, and it's good in its own merits. It's good just inherently, but it also has the advantage of lowering the birth rate.
But it also has the disadvantage of reducing the number of consumers, and in capitalist societies, they get all upset about that. I mean, there are places that are paying women to have kids because, you know, their population is declining. And it's problematic for a lot of reasons. You know, an upside down population pyramid, which is what would happen, is very hard to sustain. You know, if there's not enough working people to support all the old people, you know,
or just look at small cultural areas like Detroit, how that city suffered when everybody moved out of that area because of the economic plight there.
right.
You know,
I mean,
and sorry, I didn't realize all the 70s political and social issues regarding zero population growth. I didn't realize it was a racist policy. So thank you for that education.
Yeah, I mean, not all the people were, but some of the major writers definitely wanted, you know, saw the problem as being third world people having too many kids.
yeah,
Well, yeah,
I mean,
closing our borders. I mean, we just had 4 years of that
Yeah,
nonsense. So
yeah. So there is that kind of reactionary version. It's what one of the authors I was reading was calling eco-fascism.
right. Well, what I learned when I was studying that particular issue was that it became very coldly elitist to say that populations should reduce. It's like demonizing all those little brown babies from women who don't have any option not to have them. And plus, they don't consume the resources we do. One person in the US consumes about as much as 100 or 200 people in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's like them having too many babies is not as big a deal.
Yeah, us having too many babies is far more of a problem.
Right, exactly.
or us just having too many Starbucks in a week is a problem.
Or just buying too many clothes. I mean, fast fashion has a lot on, to answer for in terms of pollution and stuff.
Planned obsolescence, over farming. I mean, take your pick. There's a whole
right.
host of them.
You know, I'm just wondering how COVID is impacting population control. I mean, maybe an unpopular topic, but you know something, it is.
Babies. More babies lately.
Are there?
There are more babies.
My daughter's 32, so among her friends, there's
a lot
of babies.
So there's more, yeah.
They're first babies, and it's about an age where people
have
a first baby.
People have babies, yeah. So there are going to be more babies in that age bracket.
Yeah. I did see a couple, because I'm so obsessed with consuming, especially textiles and plastic bags. And there are really some amazing organizations that take all kinds of clothes that are employing people to sort things. They're, repurposing things, recycling things. And if those would be the focus of industrial capitalism, that would be pretty good, because there are ways to make this work. It just, not everybody wants to bother.
Well, we do need to value things properly. I mean, one of the things, yeah. I mean, there's low-hanging fruit out there. I mean, years ago, Germany already addressed issues of packaging. I mean, think how much you throw away with everything you buy, all the packaging around it. And things like Christmas are just obscene in that regard. Single-use wrapping paper, it's just awful. And it's easy. That's not hard. That wouldn't even hurt anybody. Who cares if your packaging is biodegradable instead of, throwaway plastic, for example.
Or reused.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Looks like Dolores and or David have a comment.
Yeah, these are all interesting areas to talk about. But regarding a plan, like with the new administration, I'm always thinking of like practical steps, because now we're sort of starting from ground zero. So many things have to be, so many of the regulations that Trump did away with, are going to be put back, I guess, and stuff. But in order to have a voice, so that they hear what we're talking about and what we want to do, I'm looking for some ideas. Like, does the humanist group have a political wing that could, write some letters and try to influence some of these legislators, probably starting with the House of Representatives, and about changing things. I mean, everything depends on policy. You know, you can try to do this little thing here, that, but when there are regulations and federal policies that have to be followed, getting something passed, you know, is quite a big job. So I'm just wondering, Jim, if like, do you have not weekly, but yearly meetings where the humanists could come up with some kind of a statement on maybe a couple of things that they're asking these legislators to do federally and even statewide? I mean, is there any kind of wing that the humanists could have some voice and some influence on our policies?
Yes, the AHA, American Humanist Association, is very much involved in environmental issues. It's right. They have a new organization. I'm trying to remember what it's called. HERC, I believe. Millie, are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with the name change. I haven't, you know, I have to.
Are you on that particular committee or involved in that group? Because that would be really great. You know, express some of these things we're talking about, because.
Yeah, well, they do have, you know, they like the UUA, they make, you know, statements all the time. But this group, I'm not actually that involved with it myself. It's relatively new, but it is specifically directed toward environmentalism and what humanists can do to implement that area. So yeah, so there are things that organized humanism is doing.
And another thing I'd like to mention is that, I mean, we don't have a lot of money, but we give to groups that are like Earth Justice and then Natural Resources Defense Council, that are actually trying to stop some of these. Actually, we're able to stop the pillaging in the Arctic, you know, the Arctic, what is it that they just stop. I mean, the lawyers for the earth are helping to stop some of those things. And I think if people want to contribute to those groups, to me, that's more important.
Is what I'd recommend.
Looking to the courts or policies, those are the only two ways that I see that anything's going to change. We have a long goal.
I would recommend that you visit the, if you haven't already, the American Humanist Association website, and I'm sure you'll find stuff about, among lots of other stuff, you know, environmentalism. Like Millie said, church and state is a major thing, but it's not the only thing that the AHA is involved with. You know, they're also Black Lives Matter. Pretty much, you know, they're kind of parallel to the insurance, but there's a huge overlap between the UUA members and the AHA members.
I'd recommend 350.org as another environmental organization that's quite effective. And there's also things we can do locally to combine, you know, social justice movements. For example, I've been representing our congregation to Jobs with Justice's steering committee, and Jobs with Justice now has an environmental initiative, and they're working with 350.org and some other organizations to put together that. So there's ways that I think combining social justice actions so that we leverage all of our work, you know, that is another effective means, I think, and they have some plans of sort of doing things locally that would improve our local environment, but also on a more national and international level too.
Judith, what are the organizations that you kind of referred to? Do you have any names of local places that are working with recycled or, you know, just doing a really good job? I think I want to. It appears as if she's disappeared.
You're asking Judith?
Yeah.
The Ecology Center in Berkeley, they have amazing programs, and they also work with a high school. I forget which high school it is, but they teach kids farming and gardening. They have seed exchanges. So they're trying to do educational stuff. And this is what I'm doing too, because if I could teach some young people how to use these skills based on old folk art handcraft things, they can make them as their livelihoods. They can make cooperatives, they can do independent work, they can, and actually even with COVID, they can work independently in their own homes and be building up inventory or whatever. The Ecology Center is great. And then I also just found a store, it's in Oakland, called Mud Labs. And it's a little store, it's a sustainable market and cafe. And they have, it's really, it's not even like a store. It's like they'll sell coffee, but they're in recycled jars. So it's all kinds of recycled stuff. There's even one thing that they have these bottles that are stuffed full with plastic bags, and they say they create them as construction bricks. I don't know what they do with them, but evidently the plastic isn't going anywhere. And if it's really packed in, they can be used in construction. So that's and that's right off of Lake Merritt. It's right across from Lake Merritt.
Thank you.
So I don't know anything in San Francisco, unfortunately, except Scrap is a great place for all kinds of recycled materials. And then also the Recology, which is the trash collection that goes to San Francisco. They have a whole art gallery of things made out of stuff, and they have a whole sculpture garden. They have artists in residence that pick through the garbage and do stuff. This is also, again, very small scale. It's not a big organization, but it's just, one drop in the bucket. The more it spreads out, the better it'll be. But I would check with the Ecology Center. They have a lot of online classes and good things.
Okay.
They have a thing going on now called Ectopia. That's an online series of lectures.
Huh. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, they're great. They're great.
One of the downsides of COVID has been that you can no longer take your reusable grocery bags into the store, and and they wouldn't even they won't let you bring them into the store, and they won't let their clerks touch them. So after accumulating about 100 paper bags that I have no more room for storage for, they just pile it back into my cart, and I put it in the bags before I put it in the trunk. But
that's what
there's a lot of things like that have just gone by the wayside. As a matter of fact, they used to collect the used old plastic grocery bags outside the grocery stores. They don't do that anymore because nobody's going to touch those things. Right. It's sort of sad. There's a lot of things that have stopped operating. They're on hiatus until this weirdness is over.
And of course, by not going out and driving around and going to meetings and all that stuff, we're also saving a lot of the
true enough
during this period too. So that may counterbalance some of that.
My car insurance went down because I'm not driving very much.
My car complained because I'm not driving enough. It can't run its diagnostics unless I run the engine for 10 minutes at a time. So
our emissions have gone down 7% last year in 2020 because of the COVID crisis. But now, anyway, that's what I read.
Okay, Dolores, did you have another question, or is it?
David wants to say something.
Oh, I just following up on Millie's recommendation of 350.org. Are you referring to 350 Bay Area or what?
Well, but
my impression is that the driving force of 350 for a long time was Bill McKibben, who I think is sort of semi-retired on the East Coast. I just wonder about the local scene of 350.
Yeah, I honestly am not that familiar with what they're doing locally. I mean, I know that Jobs with Justice is attempting to partner with them right now. And I certainly appreciate the work Bill McKibben has done nationally. I think he's one of the best popular writers on the topic of environment. Yeah, he really explains things well and clearly, and is, to people who may not really know anything about it at all. So I appreciate his work on that level. But I honestly, one thing, I actually live in the East Bay. I have for quite a few years now, even though I'm still a member of the San Francisco congregation. So I'm not that engaged, exception of Jobs with Justice and a handful of other things with things that are going on in San Francisco proper.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap up here? Okay. Well, I want to thank Millie for a very enlightening talk. I learned a lot, and so we appreciate that, Millie.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming. It was a very good conversation, and so I think it was very good. And hope you can join us for future events.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jim, for inviting me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Millie.
Thank you.